I kept a cracked tile in my kit for 11 months before it mattered, and I never had a good answer for why. My name is Colton Reyes. I was 26 years old and 6 weeks into my first off-world contract when it happened, working hull maintenance on the Corvain ring, under a Thren foreman who thought human labor was a cost-saving measure and nothing more. The ring was a trade station, a wheel of daylit concourses strung along the equator of a gas giant so close that its amber light came through every viewport unfiltered, warm and heavy, like standing in front of an open oven door. I liked that light. It was the one thing about the job that felt like home. The Thren built everything out of lattice tile, armored panels the size of a dinner plate, each one studded on the underside with 6 calibrated pegs that seated into a socket grid with a precision I still don't have the vocabulary to describe. A Thren fabricator could mill a tile to a tolerance of microns, snap it against the hull, and it married the socket grid so cleanly you couldn't find the seam with your fingernail. That was the whole philosophy of Thren engineering. Perfect fit, first time, no adjustment, no compromise. Anything that didn't meet spec got fed back into the recycler within the hour. They didn't repair flawed material, they erased it and started over. Humans didn't work that way, and the Thren never let us forget it. We patched, we shimmed, we kept spares that weren't quite right, because sometimes not quite right was better than nothing at 3 in the morning with the air already thinning. My foreman, an overseer named Yith Kalar, used to walk our storage lockers during inspection and pull out anything scarred or warped and hold it up like evidence in a trial. "This is why your ships smell of solvent," Kalar told me once, turning a dented brace over in 4 long fingers. "You cannot bear to let a broken thing go." I had a broken thing I couldn't let go of. A single lattice tile, cracked along one edge in a hairline that ran from the 3rd peg almost to the 4th, put there during a supply drop gone wrong in my 2nd week. A crate had shifted, a strap had failed, and the tile had taken the hit meant for my hand. I should have fed it to the recycler like the manual said. Instead, I wrapped it in a rag and kept it in the bottom of my kit, and when Kalar asked why, I told him it was luck. That wasn't true. The truth was simpler and harder to explain. Something had protected me, and I didn't feel right throwing it away for being marked by the job it had done. The debris strike came on a Tuesday, ship time, during the docking window for a bulk hauler running the outer approach too fast. Nobody's fault in the end. A shard of packing ice shed off the hauler's hull at the wrong angle and caught the transfer concourse dead center, a viewport frame 12 meters wide, sunlight and all. It didn't blow the glass. It warped the frame around it, twisted the whole socket grid out of true in a starburst, maybe half a meter across, right where 4 support ribs met. The alarms went up a half-second later. I remember the light through the cracked pane going from amber to white as the emergency floods kicked on, and I remember running toward the breach instead of away from it, because that was the job. The calibrated got there almost as fast as I did, 6 drones on a single overseer's authority, Kalar's authority, moving in that eerie synchronized glide the Thren built into everything mechanical. They didn't panic. They didn't need to. They began milling replacement tile on the spot, extruding fresh panels warmed straight out of the fabricator, each one shaped by laser measurement to match the warped socket grid to the micron. I watched the first one go in. It should have seated. It didn't. The grid had twisted just enough, in 3 dimensions instead of 2, that a perfectly rigid tile milled to a perfectly rigid spec could not flex into a socket that was no longer a perfect circle. The drone recalculated, milled another. Same result. The air in the concourse was already thin enough that I could hear my own pulse in my ears, and the drones kept producing flawless tile after flawless tile that refused, every time, to fit a wound that wasn't flawless anymore. Kalar's voice came over the comm, flat with something I hadn't heard from him before. Recalibrating tolerance. They tried again. Wider tolerance meant a looser tile, and a looser tile meant it would seat for exactly as long as it took the pressure differential to spit it back out into the void. I could see that coming before their models caught up to it. Time was the one thing the calibrated couldn't manufacture more of. I don't know exactly why I reached into my kit. I've been asked since, and the honest answer is that I wasn't thinking about tolerances at all. I was thinking about the shape of the gap, the way it bowed instead of sat flat, the way it needed something that could give a little, instead of something that couldn't give it all. And I had, at the bottom of my kit, wrapped in a rag, one single tile that had already learned how to bend, because something had already broken it once, and it had held anyway. I pulled the cracked tile out and pressed it into the warped socket by hand, both palms flat against the panel, my thumb resting right over the hairline crack where it ran nearest the edge. The tile flexed, not much, a few degrees of give, along that old fracture line that a perfect tile simply didn't have in it, and it rocked into the twisted grid the way nothing rigid could. I felt the pegs find their sockets one at a time under my hands, felt the panel settle, and then I felt it click home, a small, hard sound traveling up through my thumb and into my wrist, and the hiss of escaping air went quiet around me, like something exhaling all the way out. For a second, nobody moved. 6 drones held motionless in the warm gas giant light, their sensors still cycling, still trying to reconcile a repair their models said was structurally impossible with a repair that was, at that moment, holding pressure at 0 deviation. I stayed where I was with my thumb still pressed to the crack, because some part of me was afraid that if I let go, it would remember it was flawed and give up the seal. Kalar arrived a minute later on foot, which the Thren almost never did when a drone could reach a site faster. He stood over the tile for a long time without speaking, 4 fingers spread near the seam but not touching it, the way you'd study something you didn't want to admit you understood. "This is defective stock," he said finally. It wasn't an accusation. It came out closer to a question. "Yes," I said. "It should not perform within tolerance." "It doesn't perform within tolerance," I said. "It performs within the gap. That's not the same measurement." He didn't answer right away. Behind him, the drones had gone quiet in a way that felt less like standby and more like listening, if a machine can listen, and I've since decided that some of them can, in their own patient way. Kalar crouched, finally, and laid 2 fingers flat against the crack itself, tracing its length the way I'd seen him trace flaws before, back when tracing a flaw meant condemning it. This time he just held his hand there. "You kept it broken," he said. "On purpose." "I kept it," I said. "I didn't decide it was broken. I decided it was mine." He straightened up without a word and canceled the recycling order that had been queued on my locker since the day he first found the tile. I checked the log afterward, out of a stubbornness I still can't fully account for. He never told me he was wrong about anything. Thren overseers don't do that. Not out loud, not in a station log where 6 drones could read it back to him. But the tile stayed in the socket for the rest of my contract, holding a seam no fresh milled panel could have held. And every time I walked that concourse afterward, the amber light came through the old crack in a thin bright line, like something the station had decided, on its own, to keep. I still have a cracked tile in my kit. It isn't the same one. That one's still bolted into the ring, doing its job, and I like to think it always will be. This one I cracked myself, on purpose, the week before my contract ended, snapping a fresh tile along one edge, and keeping it exactly the way a broken thing deserves to be kept, close, and on purpose, and never quite thrown away.